We will now begin with remarks from Captain Navy Paul Forget of the Canadian Joint Operation Command, who will provide an update on Canada's support to the international coalition against Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant.
Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Aujourd'hui, je ferai une mise à jour sur l'opération IMPACT, le soutien fourni par les forces armées canadiennes à la lutte de la coalition contre le groupe ISIL en Irak. In recent weeks, ISIL has suffered a number of tactical setbacks and is pressed on multiple fronts, most notably in northern Iraq, where Iraqi security forces have regained control of several villages. ISIL leadership is struggling to sustain military efforts. Morale is steadily declining, particularly in areas of sustained coalition and Iraqi security forces operations. Unable to claim any significant victories in recent weeks, ISIL is escalating displays of public brutality in an attempt to intimidate opponents and the local populations. They are also resorting to the execution of their own members for fleeing from battle. Dans le nord, les forces de sécurité irakiennes, avec le soutien des opérations aériennes de la coalition, étendent leur contrôle dans la région de Mosul. The resulting success of Iraqi security forces operations has forced ISIL to push their supply routes further to the south, off the main highway. This further exposes ISIL movements to coalition airstrikes, limits their freedom of movement, and makes resupply efforts very difficult. In central Iraq, Beja remains a contested area with daily fighting. Nous continuons d'appuyer les forces de sécurité irakiennes par moyen de frappes aériennes ainsi que des missions de surveillance. Depuis le début des opérations, la coalition a effectué plus de 1300 frappes aériennes en Irak. These strikes targeted heavy weapons, vehicles, fighting positions, tactical units, and buildings used by ISIL. By damaging and destroying these assets, we are supporting the Iraqi security forces in their ongoing efforts on the ground and degrading ISIL's ability and their will to fight. Since I last spoke to you, CF-18 aircraft have conducted 14 airstrikes. The map behind me shows the dates and locations of these airstrikes that struck enemy fighting and mortar positions, vehicles, heavy engineering equipment, and facilities. Depuis le début de l'opération IMPACT, nos aéronefs ont effectué un total de 467 sorties. Nos CF-18 ont effectué 306 sorties, alors que le Polaris en a fait 76, livrant plus de 4,3 millions de livres de carburant. Enfin, nos Aurora en ont fait 85 sorties. En résumé, la coalition a halté l'avance du groupe ISIL et nous voyons des signes de progrès. Cela met fin à mes commentaires formels et je suis prêt à répondre à vos questions. Merci.
Merci, Captain Forget. We will now begin with questions from the floor. There are 2 microphones on each side of the room. Please identify yourselves as well as your news agency. Please limit yourselves to 1 question and 1 follow-up, please. Veuillez vous identifier ainsi que votre agence. Veuillez vous limiter à une question principale et une question de complémentaire.
Bonjour, Raymond Fillon de TVA. La dernière fois que vous nous aviez parlé ici, vous nous aviez dit qu'à 2 reprises, en plus d'une autre précédente, il y avait eu des échanges de coups de feu entre des militaires canadiens et des membres de l'État islamique. Est-ce que ça a été le cas depuis le 26 janvier, à nouveau, c'est-à-dire depuis la dernière fois que vous nous avez parlé?
Et donc, depuis le 26 janvier, depuis la dernière occasion, il y a eu une instance similaire tout justement au ceux précédemment. Et je peux vous assurer qu'il n'y a eu aucune blessure à nos militaires et que tout le monde est sain et sauf.
Est-ce que vous pouvez nous expliquer dans quel contexte ça s'est produit, cette...
Et donc le contexte était...
Quelle date?
La date comme telle, je préfère pas la mentionner parce que nous essayons de garder un petit peu de sécurité opérationnelle au niveau de nos opérations spéciales. Je ne veux pas lier nos membres à un certain temps et un certain lieu en espace. Donc je préfère... pour des raisons d'opération de sécurité, de ne pas discuter à ce niveau. Mais c'est quand même récemment que c'est arrivé.
Plusieurs échanges de coups de feu?
C'est juste une instance.
Une instance. Oui, mais combien de coups de feu dans cette instance?
aucune idée. Les coups de feu ont duré jusqu'à temps que la situation soit résolue, évidemment. Mais j'ai aucun détail comme tel au niveau, mais je peux vous assurer qu'il y a eu une instance de défense légitime pour nos membres où ils ont eu à retourner le feu contre eux du groupe ISIL.
Could you translate that into
So
English?
I think it's important actually for the English audience to understand that is that in fact there's only been one instance since the last report of where our special operations folks had to return fire in self-defense in response to coming under fire by ISIL forces.
You mentioned that it was quite similar to the previous instances. In what way was it different?
I don't have any details, and quite honestly, I don't want to get into the details of what it is, because again, it's linking events, time and space with our SOF operators, and I really don't want to make those linkages, because for operational security reasons, that starts actually indicating exactly where they're operating. I would prefer not to go there.
Please make sure that you use the microphone.
Yeah, sorry,
Please make sure that you identify yourself and your news outlet. Next question, Madame.
Catherine Holland from the CBC. Sir, I'm wondering, I know in the past you've been unwilling to give us a precise number of ISIS fighters that have been killed by Canadian forces, but could you give us a ballpark? Are we talking tens, dozens, hundreds?
Admittedly, I'm personally not tracking those numbers, and so I wouldn't even be in a position to be able to provide you that number. I think it's important, on the other hand, to focus on the effects. And the effects, as I described them in my text, have been quite pronounced. We're seeing some large movements. We're seeing large degradations of ISIL forces. We're taking away their capability to fight, their will to fight. The fact that ISIL has started killing their own fighters for their willingness to not fight for them is pretty indicative of how things are turning a little bit.
President Obama said something yesterday that made me wonder about what Canada is doing. He talked about the fact that under the new plan he's proposing American soldiers, if no local forces could go in, if a target, an ISIS target was found, say a group of commanders, and no local forces could go in those specific emergency instances, U.S. forces would go in and take down that target. What is Canada's guidelines around a situation like that?
So Canada's guidelines have not changed. The mandate remains as it currently stands. An advise and assist role for our special operations forces and the air campaign for the remainder of our forces. So that mandate has not changed.
Madame.
Well, my other colleagues got a few extra questions, and maybe just one more about our capacity to
Madame, on va vous revenir. We'll get back to you. Please, next.
Bonjour, Nicolas Lafont, 45e Nord. Ça fait bientôt 4 mois qu'on est en Irak, on fait des frappes. Est-ce que les recommandations que le général Constable doit faire au général Vance, au général Lawson, qui va remettre au ministre, ont été faites? Monsieur Kennedy disait tout récemment que le gouvernement n'avait pas encore pris de décision. Est-ce que ça veut dire qu'on a remis ces recommandations déjà au gouvernement?
Et donc, il y a seulement une personne qui fait des recommandations au gouvernement du Canada, et c'est le chef d'état-major comme tel. Et donc, ces recommandations ont été fournies au gouvernement du Canada. Et donc, c'est au gouvernement de décider si la mission va être prolongée ou non.
Et en follow-up, donc comme je disais, ça fait quelques mois de frappe. On se dirige vers une grande opération, les forces irakiennes se dirigent vers une grande opération de reconquête, notamment de Mossoul. On est déjà pas mal à Mossoul, avec 13 frappes qui ont été faites depuis le début, canadiennes, dans la région. Est-ce qu'on doit s'attendre justement au cours des prochaines semaines à une intensification des frappes canadiennes dans la région de Mossoul?
Oui. C'est un des lieux où il y a beaucoup d'activités militaires au niveau des forces de sécurité irakiennes. Nos frappes, en général, sont tous en conséquence de leur assister à avoir un chemin un peu plus libre dans leurs attaques. Donc, la simple réponse est oui.
Hi, Michael Golden National. You're talking about the degradation of the ISIS forces. Maybe if you could describe the morale of Canadian forces given this, the obvious inroads we're making and how it may be affecting our operations on the ground. Does this mean that they're going to continue full throttle, or how could that change things?
And so the tempo of operations has been fairly significant for our forces on the ground. But I would argue, having been on deployed missions before, it's always an honor to serve, if you will, in that respect, because you're actually going out doing what you've been training to do and delivering on effects for the government of Canada. And so that, from a morale perspective, is always a highlight. And so morale is good.
I would assume that the decision on, what Canada will do next, and, obviously it's a long battle, but will come from the front lines, will come from people that are seeing the inroads. Given what you're saying, it almost sounds like the way ISIS is, their morale is going, that we're getting closer to the end than we were at the beginning. How would you qualify that in terms of what Canadians want to know about when their men and women may be coming home?
Right. Granted, I totally understand where you're coming from. Long story short is that, prolongation of the mission or an extension to the mission has not yet been announced by the government of Canada. So that remains as is. The current rotation that's in theater, schedules for bringing them home are already planned for and in place. And so that rotation of personnel, should there be an extension announced by the government of Canada, we're prepared to support all those activities as required, as per the mandate provided to us by the government. The rotation of people in and out of an operational theater is a very common thing for us, and so there's nothing really sensational about that. It's part of our normal processes that we do for any given operation.
And do we know when that is, that rotation? So I know, I mean, you just brought up the rotation, how can I not ask him about it, honestly?
I understand, but we
Completely
need...
dependent on whether or not the government decides to extend the mission.
Right. Question over to you?
Yeah, Omar Sechvina from CTV National News. Any update on the number of civilian casualties? Is that still zero as far as you know, or has that, what's the change?
And so from the strikes the Canadians have executed, I can confirm that, in fact, we have no indications of any civilian casualties whatsoever resulting from Canadian airstrikes.
President Obama also said yesterday that could go on for quite some time. The number 3 years came up, although he said that was not a concrete timeline or a deadline by any means of the imagination. What is the exit strategy? What would be the criteria involved to say that the Canadians have fulfilled their mandate and can leave?
Well, I think the exit strategy is going to be defined by whatever government direction is provided to us. Essentially, I mean, the exit strategy could be as simple as the mandate's not extended. And so if the mandate's not extended, there's the Canadian exit strategy. We come home, right? And so we are serving right now based on the mandate provided us by the government of Canada. We're continuing to do that. Should that mandate get extended, we're prepared to do so.
Thank you. Madame?
What can you tell us about the military's capacity for providing more special advisors in Iraq, but also in other areas? Do we have the potential to, for instance, double the number of special advisors? Should we be called upon to do that?
We're continuously looking at contingencies to be able to provide options to government. Right now, we're acting in accordance with the government that's been provided to us. That mandate, should it change, we're prepared to provide advice to the government on what we can and cannot provide them with. And then we shape that discourse, right? But as it stands right now, as the mandate is currently framed, we're in full support and providing a valued membership, if you will, to the coalition in the effort in Iraq.
But my question is, what is our capacity?
Our capacity would be dictated on what the government of Canada wants us to do. Right now, we're operating within that mandate.
Okay, but you're saying you would provide advice, and I'm curious to...
It's not for me to provide advice to the government of Canada, that's the Chief of the Defence Staff who does that.
All right, thank you. We will go to the phone. Operator, do we have someone?
Thank you. We will now take questions from the telephone line. Nous allons maintenant prendre des questions téléphoniques. If you're using a speakerphone, please let your handset before making your selection. Si tu as un téléphone mêlé, veuillez soulever le combiné avant d'effectuer votre sélection. Please press star 1 at this time for any questions. Veuillez appuyer sur étoile 1 maintenant pour toute question. We have a question from David Lundgren from Reuters. Please go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for doing this. Couple of quick questions. Minister Kenny said yesterday the government was inclined to extend the mandate. If it did, what would happen to the pilot jets you have in the region? Would they all be brought back and exchanged? Or would you just exchange the crew?
And although I don't have the specific details of exactly how that would transpire, there's always the potential for the rotation of aircraft in theater as well as air crews. That happens on a cyclical basis all the time.
And secondly, you must be pretty sure the government is going to extend this mission. I mean, the signs are all there. Is that what you're expecting?
Well, I think until it's announced, it would be, it's not for me to speculate how exactly that's going to go. But suffice to say that we have in fact planned for an extension, should that be the case, and that's just prudent military planning to be prepared to support any government initiatives.
Thank you. Prochaine question.
Thank you. Our next question is from Manon Cornelier. Notre prochaine question est de Manon Cornelier from Journal Le Devoir, du Journal Le Devoir. Please go ahead, t'as la parole.
On a aidé au transport d'armes qui étaient fournis par d'autres pays vers les forces kurdes et irakiennes. Est-ce qu'on continue à faire ça? Et est-ce qu'on leur fournit des images satellites pour faire leur combat? Est-ce qu'on offre nous-mêmes de l'équipement non létal? C'est juste un update là-dessus.
Oui, non, compris. Et si je comprends bien votre question, oui, le gouvernement du Canada a fait des contributions d'aide non létale dans la région. Nous avons aussi aidé à la transportation d'aide létale à la région au tout début de la mission. Ce n'est pas une tâche que nous continuons à faire présentement. Je crois que ça répond à votre question.
Est-ce qu'on envisage leur fournir des armes? Les Kurdes, des Peshmerga et les forces avaient entre autres demandé qu'on les aide en fournissant des armes. Est-ce qu'on envisage de le faire?
Ça serait une décision qui viendrait du gouvernement du Canada et donc je ne suis pas en mesure de répondre à cette question présentement.
Merci. Prochaine question.
Thank you. Our next question is from Jessica Hum from Sun Media. Notre prochaine question de Jessica Hum de Sun Media. À vous la parole. Please go ahead.
Thanks. When the UAE announced, I guess it was actually in December, that they were not going to be participating in the airstrikes anymore, it was because they were concerned over the inability, I guess, of search and rescue missions for their personnel. The UAE has resumed their airstrikes. I guess my question is, does this indicate, are you aware of any increases, I guess, in measures to conduct search and rescue of any personnel? Is that, do you know that is that why they rejoined the mission?
And so I can't speak on behalf of the government of the UAE in that regard as to why they stopped and why they restarted. What I can tell you is that combat search and rescue is being provided to coalition members in the region, and that with the combine the search and rescue capability with the training and equipment that our aircrew are provided, that we're quite content that the right measures are in place for the safety and security of our personnel.
Have those measures been raised at all, though? Like, is it the same as it was back in October?
To the best of my knowledge, they remain extant at this juncture.
Thank you. We have time for 2 more questions. Next question, please.
Thank you. The next question is from David Puglisi from Ottawa Citizen. Notre prochaine question est de David Puglisi de Ottawa Citizen. À vous la parole. Please go ahead.
Yes, hi, thanks. The Pentagon has been saying since August 2014 that ISIL morale is declining. Just wondering, what's the difference this time?
I'm sorry, I missed the last piece there.
Well, I'm just wondering, what you're saying that ISIL morale is steadily declining. The Pentagon's been saying that since summer of 2014. So but ISIL continues to fight on. So I'm just trying to, piece together what's different this time for you to make that statement.
Well, I think, as I indicated in my text, the increased atrocities that we're seeing, the increased barbarity, if you will, of trying to influence the local populations that they are influenced on, and I think the mere fact that they've resorted to beheading their own fighters for not fighting or for fleeing the scene, if you will, is a pretty strong indicator that there's some problems in the ranks.
And my follow-up question. So you mentioned on this Special Forces self-defense firing back, but you can't give any details. So how do we know that it was self-defense?
Well, the report I received was that it was a similar in circumstance to the ones that have been previously reported. I'm going to take that report as face value and assure you that that is in fact how that went down.
Merci. Prochaine question et dernière question.
Thank you. Our last question is from Murray Brewster. Notre dernière question de Murray Brewster, de Canadian Press, de la presse canadienne. À vous la parole, please go ahead.
Captain, I
wondering if you can just clarify something. Have the Special Forces guided any further airstrikes beyond what was reported, the 13 that were reported previously?
I think you're going to be a bit disappointed with my answer. Is I don't know. I'm not tracking exactly every time that they are painting a target. What I can tell you, though, is that they're still operating within the mandate that's been assigned to them, of which that is part.
And as a follow-up, as part of the U.S. resolution that is now before Congress, it has been proposed that the American Special Forces could participate in hunt and kill operations similar to what was done in Afghanistan during Operation Enduring Freedom. Is that something that the Special Forces currently have the capacity to do, or Canadian Special Forces have the capacity to do in northern Iraq?
That's a bit of a difficult question to answer. It's certainly not within the mandate that they've been assigned. Capacity is one thing, authority is another. And so currently the mandate is advise and assist, and they continue to operate in that capacity. And if that mandate was to change, it would be signaled by the Government of Canada.
Thank you, merci. This concludes our briefing session for today.